Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. And we're going to do a quick review of the new Black Sabbath album, 13. Black Sabbath, from the UK, godfathers of doom metal, legendary metal band, a band that I constantly recommend if people ever say to me, Anthony, how do you get into metal? Listen to early Black Sabbath albums. Not only can you just not go wrong with any of the band's initial LPs, the self-titled, Paranoid, Master of Reality, the hits go on, and what's cool is that great records from this band continued to come out even after they switched lead singers from Ozzy Osbourne to Ronnie James Dio. But now, with 13, we're dealing with basically the first Black Sabbath album to have Ozzy on it since like the 70s. And we're working with an original lineup on this LP too, except for drummer Bill Ward, unfortunately. Actually, Brad Wilk of Rage Against the Machine replaced him on this LP for all the studio sessions. And as much as I love Rage Against the Machine, and I know Brad Wilk to be an incredibly capable drummer, still, just all the changes, all the time, just all of the weak solo projects, it all just made me very skeptical to listen to this album. The Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention album title were only in it for the money comes to mind. When I gave this album a listen, I did get the sense that Ozzy, Iommi, and Geezer are just really not messing around. For one, Ozzy's vocals on the rest of this album, outside of the God Is Dead track, are way more on point, and at times sounding pretty sinister. Even though Ozzy hasn't always been with Sabbath, he's never really stopped singing throughout his career, so it's not like he needs to kind of get back in gear with that or anything. There have been critics of how Ozzy has performed in the live setting as of late, but in regards to putting together the performances for this album, I mean, Ozzy's vocals came out good. Maybe he's not coming off as extreme as he used to, but for sure, I mean, he sounds captivating. He sounds like his signature self. And not to mention the really awesome harmonica solo on the track Damaged Soul. It really feels like Black Sabbath is taking us back to the old days with Ozzy doing that. And Tony Iommi's riffs, they're heavy, they're slow, they're just dark, but there is a little bit of a lack of momentum to them, a lack of groove to them. There isn't this vast, chilling, creepy openness to them that made a lot of the band's previous work just so eerie. And for the most part, the reason that is because of the very bad production choices that happen on this album. There's just way too much volume and compression on this LP. I just don't know what was up with Rick Rubin producing this album. Black Sabbath, they come from a time when there wasn't an extreme amount of compression being laid upon every single track in modern metal music because, let's face it, metal music more than most genres abuses distortion and compression because everybody's got to be the hardest, the heaviest, and the loudest. And I feel like Black Sabbath felt some kind of pressure to compete in that lane, unfortunately, instead of just kind of letting the natural and fantastic tones and sounds of the guitars and bass shine through. And that's another thing. The extreme use of compression on this album really buries Geezer's bass to the point where you can't even really make out what it's doing half of the time. I know that there are modern records that make use of this, that do sound good, and, I'm not taking anything away from them. But Black Sabbath, they play in a style that sounds better when it's not choked off with compression. As good as some of the songwriting is on this album, I can't help but feel like the sound could be so much better. I actually think even Brad Wilk's drums suffer a little bit at the hands of just Tony Iommi's guitars being fattened and turned up all the way. And in terms of just really structuring these songs, Ozzy and company are not screwing around either. They're not writing really short tracks and then kind of cutting out and just and leaving and turning in the other direction. I mean, they have delivered over 10 songs here that a lot of them land in the 7-8 minute mark. Black Sabbath is coming off pretty ambitious with their songwriting, and they're padding these songs out, justifying these lengths with multiple parts, moments where things speed up, really awesome solos. To be completely honest, the solos are really the most riveting thing on this album, aside from some of the vocal performances and the harmonica. The solos are really where Tony lets loose and makes this record feel kind of wild and free, which is really necessary given how much the compression and everything else kind of locks it, flattens it, and makes it feel slightly lifeless. No way this thing is going to be one of my favorite Black Sabbath records ever, but I actually am pretty surprised that it did not come out as horrible as I thought it would. I actually did come out of this thing liking a lot of the tracks. I just wish the sound was better. You know, even though I think the songs are good and I think technically the performances were all on point, I just think the sound should have been reconsidered. You know, I mean, if Black Sabbath was going to go all the way back and try to really recapture the magic of their older stuff by writing songs in a similar vein, and believe me, there are even riffs on this album that sound similar to riffs from their first 4 records. If they were going to go back and try to recapture that magic, playing wise, technically, they could have at least attempted to recapture that as well through just the sound of the instrumentation, the sound of the production. That's pretty much my take on this LP. If you've given it a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Black Sabbath, forever.